Hello, this is Laurel Bates, and I'm presenting for my group number 1. We chose to focus our presentation on the decline of the British Empire after World War II. So at its peak in 1922, it was said that the sun never set on the British Empire. Britain's colonies spread from Australia to India, through Africa, and all the way to Canada. The empire spread over 13 million square miles at its height and was composed of 57 different colonies or territories. Immediately after the Second World War, over a quarter of the world's population were under British rule. So World War II lasted for 6 years, from 1939 to 1945. Now, at the end of World War II, there's a major relative decline in wealth and power for Great Britain. These numbers here show that while Britain's economy still grew, their relative economic growth was much lower compared to the other countries after World War II. While Britain's GDP doubled in the 30 years after the war, both Western Europe and the world's GDP tripled in those same 30 years. Shortly after World War II, in 1947, Britain lost India as a colony when India gained independence. This was a major change for the British Empire. This process was mostly spurred on by Mahatma Gandhi. He was a man largely responsible for the liberation of India from Britain. Here we can see the quote from him that a small body of determined spirits fired by an unquenchable faith in their mission can alter the course of history. Now, Gandhi's goal was to use nonviolent methods to change the course of history and liberate India. He executed these nonviolent protests in many different ways, one of which being his Salt March. In 1930, Gandhi traveled on foot for 24 days to the coast, along with over 70 of his followers. When they reached the seaside, Gandhi protested the British monopoly on salt production, which had prevented the Indian people from producing and selling their own salt, by taking water from the Arabian Sea, boiling it, and making salt. He believed that without Indian cooperation, the British imperialist rule would not be able to sustain itself in India. At this point, India was in an unfortunate situation as it was dependent on Great Britain as the mother colony and relied on of its goods and leadership for their production, for their rule. His goal was to make India a much more self-sustaining country that would allow them to thrive after their independence. He personally boycotted British products and urged other people to do the same. In this picture here on the left, you can see him with his spinning wheel. He wanted the Indian people to produce their own clothing and textiles instead of relying on British products. And the spinning wheel became kind of a symbol of Indian self-sufficiency. The link on this page links up to a video of Gandhi spinning at his wheel. Now, although it was probably the most prominent, India was not the only country to gain its independence during this time from Great Britain. Many more followed after World War II. Although, as I mentioned, the British Empire ruled 700 million colonial subjects in 1945, by 1965, only 5 million were under its control, and these people were mostly living in Hong Kong, which was under British rule at the time. This meant that Britain this decline in territory meant that Britain no longer had a strong market for British goods in its colonies, and it just showed a gradual weakening of the British Empire. So here we can note the relative decline of Britain with other European countries. I think it's interesting to note that even Germany, after World War II, was growing at a much faster rate than Great Britain, even though Great Britain was one of the victors. So according to Sir Nicholas Henderson, a former British ambassador, Britain's economic decline can be attributed to three things: poor management from business leaders, trade union, and problems with foreign policy, specifically the unwillingness of the British to work alongside other European countries. So in 1968, the Troubles began. Ireland had been one of England's earliest colonies, and in 1921, a portion of Ireland gained independence from England. However, 6 counties in the north still remained under British rule. 1968 to 1998 marked a time of the Troubles. These 30 years were a prolonged time of conflict between the British government and Irish nationalists, who were fighting for the complete independence of Ireland. Now, one of the peak conflict was Bloody Sunday on January 30th, 1972. At this time, 26 peaceful protesters were shot, and 13 of these protesters died by shots fired by British paratroopers. Now, this event rightfully gave the British Empire very bad press worldwide, and was a very sad situation. It also showed a kind of loss of face for Britain, because it seemed to show the entire world that they could no longer properly control even their oldest colony. So as we've noticed, this decline resulted and was in part caused by a period of rapid decolonization. During this same time, while Great Britain was in its decline, the United States and the Soviet Union were growing in their economies, becoming superpowers, and beginning to overshadow Great Britain and the former British Empire. Another result of this decline of the empire was that we have the growth of the Third World. As these young nations achieved independence from their colonial rulers, they struggled to develop on their own, and the gap between the rich and the poor nations became much larger than it had been in the war. In summary, the decline of the British Empire was really what made the world what it is today, with a contrast between the West and the Third World, and a change that caused the British Empire to no longer be the predominant Western force. Thank you very much for listening. Our references that we used. Have a great day.